Slate?
Josh, you got this?
Yeah.
I do recall that it was kind of gray and a little grimy. It was an industrial city. It certainly had that appearance, and I know if we stayed in the area and went out for a walk, it was exciting.
My first impressions were coming through. I'm from Milwaukee, so they're not terribly dissimilar cities in that they're industrial, sort of Midwestern, manufacturing bases, particularly back then. And I kind of remember driving through on my way to go to college in Massachusetts. But that was not a distinct feeling for the city. So I actually think that maybe the first time I was actually in the city was this time with Elliot Murphy. So by '75, I think the city had started to sort of come into a little bit of a decline. And so each time we came back, that was a little bit more pronounced. Just as same thing happened in Milwaukee and a lot of the industrial cities of the Midwest.
The first trip here, we were like really excited to come here because we'd never been here before, and there was so much excitement coming at us from Cleveland via WMMS because they were playing our record. And this was all pretty new stuff for us because we hadn't had a record out for very long, and we didn't get much airplay at the time. So, and to think that there was some, fans that were digging our music in the United States was kind of mind-blowing. So it was all very exciting, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, Buffalo was an exotic destination for us then.
I remember Cleveland because of the Chicks. I remember Cleveland that you could play the Agoras and during the drum solo be serviced by a willing young thing.
I think there's a certain chip on a lot of people from Cleveland's shoulder, because Cleveland's been, has gone through some tough times over the years. But Cleveland people have endured, and we continue to survive. And Clevelanders are Clevelanders, man. We're just a tough breed, and that's just never going to change.
When we came through in Talking Heads, it was that I felt like, well, I've come back to a place I already know. I also have this remembrance that I think is quite similar to the one of in Stranger Than Paradise, where we wanted to go look at Lake Michigan after playing the Agora. And we drove down to some dock, and I think it was sort of snowing. And we just drove out on the dock and went, well, there's Lake Erie. Okay, now we can go back to the hotel.
It was always a blue-collar rock and roll town, and it's always that way. But Cleveland was always one of those hardcore party towns where you'd come and you knew the show was going to be great, and you could hang out and party with people and new friends, old friends, and whatever happened was usually pretty okay.
The funny thing about Cleveland is well known for being such a springboard for so many bands to break out of Cleveland. Rush, Kiss was one of the, Cleveland was one of the first cities to really get into them. Mott the Hoople, Bowie, Bruce Springsteen. I mean, so many bands. Cleveland was the first city that really got it.
It was always special to us because of the fact we broke here, and we always viewed it as an important city for rock and roll because of the working class town and because rock meant so much. It was such an important escape for so many young people. And if you were doing well here, that sort of bled into Detroit and bled through the Midwest. So it really was one of those key cities that opened up the Midwest to you. So I know we always viewed it, as I said, as an important rock and roll town. I don't know about other genres, but we always seem to run into musicians here too, for some reason or another.
Most of the gigs back then that were kind of outside of those opening act shows were smaller venues, bars and things like that, all over America. But here, I think, because we had a following and it's such a rock city, it was very exciting.
I remember talking to a lot of rock and roll writers
Yeah.
from this area over the years. And there seemed to be a lot of people that took rock and roll quite seriously from Cleveland, whether they were players or fans or whether they were writing about rock and roll. So I do remember that this being sort of a rock and roll town for that reason.
I knew about Cleveland because some great rock and roll had come from there. There was a really cool scene of bands that were very much Anglophiles. I was aware of the Choir or Cyrus Erie or the Raspberries. There was no shortage of cool music. A lot of great drummers coming out of Cleveland.
So many drummers I know came from Cleveland. Like Mike, a lot of people don't realize that Steven Adler from Guns N' Roses, he's from Shaker Heights. Pat Torby, who was in Mr. Big, he was from Mentor. Michael Carlone, plays in was in Damn Yankees, but been in Lynyrd Skynyrd all these years. He was from Solon. I was from Euclid. Then there was like Jimmy Fox, from James Gang. Jimmy Clark, who played in a lot of bands. He was from the West Side. Tommy Amato. Kevin Valentine, played in a lot of different bands. Kevin went to Euclid High School as well. He graduated 2 years before me. I mean, I'm just naming the drummers that I know. There was a lot of drummers that were from Cleveland, but most people don't know about Steven Adler.
Cleveland was always a great city. MMS was a great station. Kid Leo. There's a lot to be said. Cleveland is on that same mentality and point of view that Detroit is. It's blue collar. It loves rock and roll. Right from the beginning, Cleveland wrapped its arms around us and its legs.
I think it's actually quite appropriate that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is here, because I think that Cleveland really was essential particularly for guitar rock, for being a place that always embraced it. And you had audiences here that you could kind of count on the audiences coming out and being excited and coming back the next time you played and were loyal. You certainly see in like major cities from London to LA to New York that a certain blasé nature is like, kind of prove it to me. Whereas people here seemed like they really wanted to have fun. And so, yes, they wanted you to put on as good a show as possible, but they were on your side. We also always stayed at Swingos because our manager had been the manager of Mountain. And he goes, when you go to Cleveland, we have to stay at Swingos. Yeah. And Swingos, for anyone who doesn't know, was this unique hotel that I think the Rat Pack was known for staying at, where they had curtains on the windows so that you can completely black out the room. And yeah, every room had sort of a different theme. So unlike a Holiday Inn where it kind of felt like every room was the same, this one, every single room was different. And so when you're on tour, things like that, unique hotels are interesting to you.
And of course, when I finally got there and I got to Swingos, I suddenly found church. Nobody could imagine, who had never been to Swingos, what Swingos was. Swingos basically was a shrine to rock and roll with a hotel on top of it. So you go down to the bar, meet somebody, and then take the elevator upstairs. It was like quick stop and shop. It was terrific. People who are familiar with Los Angeles and know the Rainbow. The Rainbow is Swingos without the hotel. Right from the beginning, Cleveland wrapped its arms around us and its legs.
And there was also a hotel, Swingos, and there was a bar downstairs. All the flesh that was available were gathered down there, and you could have your pick. And they all seemed to know all the animal tricks, which was delightful. I kid around and I say it's how romantic. Actually, it was. The 70s were a romantic era. People were just enjoying life. You went to see a rock band, and then that night you wanted to, as they say, shack up with somebody. Enjoy life.
We also had Swingos, which was the rock and roll hotel in the country. Anybody that's seen Almost Famous would know. So you have this little triumvirate down there between hot bands, Swingos, and great place to play, and WMMS.
Post-war Cleveland, and particularly from the period 1960s and 70s on,
The city itself was shrinking. It was deindustrializing. It reached its peak population in 1950. By the 1970s, it was hemorrhaging jobs and hemorrhaging population. So you have that aspect of what's going on in the city. And demographically, the city was changing. Increasing numbers of African Americans in the city. The second Great Migration brought many blacks into the city during the World War II period. And it's also the period where the city has a number of what we call negative image issues. You have the riots in the Huff neighborhood, the rebellion, if you will, in 1966, the Glenville riots in '68. If you go into the 70s, what you're looking at is the default 1978, the river burns in '69. Those are all these images that you get of Cleveland, but I don't want to dwell on the negative. It is changing. It's another Rust Belt city. But there's something else that's happening here, which I think is central to understanding the music scene, and particularly understanding the Agora. This is the post-World War II generations coming of age, and what is happening is Cleveland is developing an educational infrastructure that it didn't have before. What I'm suggesting here is that even as population is leaving Cleveland, there's a younger population that's being attracted into the city because of the educational institutions. If you look at that, and if you look at the history of the Agora and where the Agora is over time, it's always on or near a campus. You have the Moondog Coronation Ball, and you have Alan Freed, creating what is the rock and roll scene here. And by the 1960s, rock is fairly embedded in the city. I mean, WIXY, Wixie 1260 was a major rock station. You have major acts coming into the city. The Beatles turn up in the city, for instance. The Beach Boys end up at Euclid Beach Park at one point. And there are a lot of bands that are playing here. Some memorable, some are not memorable. And that's what makes the Agora grow, is that Hank brings in local talent, and a lot of that local talent is moving at the edge, the change in the genre of rock. Now, I'm not a rock historian, but I think if I look at some of the acts that he's brought in locally, they're not doing the same old thing. They're pushing the edge because that's what they're seeing happen. And that's what he eventually folds in. When he started it was, his private dance club, a little bit of exclusivity, but it fits into something else, because if you go down to Euclid Avenue at that point, let's say 67, you're getting it at 107th and Euclid, there's La Cave, major club. If you go further down Euclid Avenue toward East Cleveland, there's the coffee shop. The coffee shop has beat poetry. Mr. Stress plays there. The James Gang plays there. So there's a music scene that's going on in that section of Euclid. And it also harkens back to the fact that prior to that, around 105th and Euclid, used to have jazz clubs. The Log Cabin was there. That's what a lot of people miss when they look at that university section, that there was, in many instances, an avant-garde coffee shop. So you had that there as well. And so Hank is working in a section where you have a populace, and he does a little exclusivity, but it only stays there for a year. And then he's downtown. He's downtown on the CSU campus. When the Agora moves down to 24th Street, there isn't a huge residential population downtown. There's some hotels where people live in. Cleveland State is just beginning to build dormitories, but the student population is growing at CSU. It is basically comprised of students who live within the region, but CSU is basically the city's university. Yeah. So if you have young people coming down there when they're finished with classes before they take the bus home or drive home, what are you going to do? You're going to club, you're going to listen to music, what's going on? And I think that's part of what happens. So you do begin at this time to see that infrastructure of restaurants and hangouts around Cleveland State. It's a smart move for Hank. The irony of where we're sitting is we're in the middle of what used to be known as Millionaires Row in the 19th century, where most of the wealthy people in Cleveland lived. The Wades, Rockefeller had a house down the street here from us. Sylvester Everett had these huge homes, and this theater was built. It sort of the neighborhood began to change, but and it was kind of a jumping neighborhood right into the 40s and 50s. It was no longer residential. But by the 1960s, Euclid Avenue was a shadow of itself. It was empty. Some of it was boarded up. And Midtown was one of these things, one of these programs, one of these dreams in Cleveland to take this section between downtown and University Circle, the two hubs, and revivify it, if you want to use that word. And Hank's move here was part of that. You could have done a suburban venue. Yeah. You have to remember that what happens in the 70s, and we can talk basketball here. Yeah. The Cleveland Arena, where the Moondog Coronation Ball was just down the street to the east of us. And the arena was the venue for ice hockey and basketball. It's where the Cavaliers first played. They played there. The Cavaliers played in a venue that was the home of the venue where the Moondog Coronation Ball was. And there's a longer story underneath that. But the Cavs decided to move out to Richfield. They vacated. The arena was torn down. And that sort of said, well, we don't really want to play basketball here. It's too small a venue. There's no parking. We can't draw the right crowd, if you will. There are a lot of stories about it. So coming out here, with that change there, what's this huge empty structure, and so it's taking a risk.
When I was in New York in the 1970s, and all Cleveland was blossoming because of MMS and all the people that were here, and John Gorman and Kid Leo and all the whole staff of people and everything else like that, I was very much aware of what was going on in Cleveland by reading the trades and talking to my good friends like Steve Popovich and Henry. There was a good buzz in New York about Cleveland because they knew it was a good market, it was a friendly market, you had good support with anything that was done. And artists were aware of that. And artists knew that if they came to Cleveland and you got MMS behind you, that you could start counting the record sales because it was going to happen. And the things that were happening when Springsteen and some of the others were coming here, and Bowie and getting their starts, they were very, very aware of Cleveland and its potential for selling records and everything else like that.